fun. So I'm going to share my screen with you and get that up on there. And then we will have Gabby start.
And we're recording as well, so we can start putting these in our cloud or Facebook or whatever.
Good job, Jerry.
Well, Nancy's been asking every time, it's like, I want to view it, but do you have it recorded yet? And it's like, no. So we're starting.
So I get to be the first one you start with, huh?
Yes. What tree hugger?
Yeah. Do you want me to start, Sarah?
Yes. So Gabby, why don't you just kind of give a history, kind of who you are, your passions, your journey, and what led you to where you're at today?
Sure, sounds good. So that picture up there, yes, I put that as my tree hugger background, and a big piece of who I am as a nature lover and a wildlife lover. So so I've always been I'm looking at the other screen to see what my next picture is so I can tell Sarah whether or not to move the slides or not. I've always been an animal lover and did a lot of camping and exploring when I was a kid. And when I was getting ready to go into undergrad, I was really focused on communications, and I was a speech and hearing science major for a little bit and kind of not really sure where I wanted to go. And a good friend at the time was observing baby ducks with me and just watching me, how excited I got. And he just said to me, he's like, why haven't you ever thought about something like biology as a career? Because you're so passionate about it. And so then if you go to the next slide, Sarah, what I did was, I still hadn't quite figured out what I was wanting to do, but another friend and I went to Disneyland to San Diego and Disneyland as part of spring break, my maybe sophomore year at college. I went to Arizona State University, and we were at the San Diego Zoo, and we went to the giant panda research station and we're observing there. And some of the researchers were actually there while we were there. And I started chatting with one, and all of a sudden this just world opened up to me about, oh, I could be I just hadn't really thought about it. I could be looking for a career where I'm helping the wildlife and the nature that I love so much about. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me. It just didn't seem like, I have no idea why it didn't. So that began my career my studying as a conservation biologist. That's what I changed my major to, and that's what I ended up graduating with undergrad with. And so if you go to the next slide, Sarah. Oh, it's in a different order on my screen. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh, yep, there you go. So this is a leopard gecko. And then
that's awesome.
Yeah, isn't it cool? These are one of my favorite.
That is so cool.
They're beautiful. And then if you look at the next slide, it's a children's python. So when I was in undergrad, I got a job helping with a research project in a lab there. And so for the children's pythons, they were breeding them. And so I was helping feed them, and we did ultrasounds on them every so often. I can't remember how often. And the leopard geckos, I was doing a study when we were looking at trying to create a birth control pill, actually, for reptiles, because people have, not necessarily leopard geckos, it's more like green iguanas and larger lizards that they don't want to breed, but they don't want to permanently lose the option to breed them. So they were looking for some kind of birth control option for them. So I was studying, using the leopard geckos as a model to understand, to see how the birth control worked. And through this experience, it really sealed for me that I love science, and but it also told me that I did not want to work in a lab. I did not want to be doing that kind of research with animals. So then I got a job at the Phoenix Zoo while I was still in undergrad. And I did put my slides in the wrong order, but my first job was teaching our summer camp program here, which is still in existence today. And that was 20 years ago. I just celebrated my 20-year anniversary. Yeah, if you can go forward a couple slides, Sarah, I put them in the wrong order. There we go. So this is not me in the picture, but this is a picture of our campers that are here for every summer. So this is what I was doing when I first started, was hanging out with kids and teaching science and biology and conservation, helping them connect with nature. My first summer was, it was actually quite funny. We had an afternoon program called Nature Camp, and we had kids out rafting in the lake in the middle of the zoo, and we were making soup on camp stoves in 115-degree weather and doing all these crazy things.
Ooh.
I know, it was crazy, but I had so much fun and just fell in love with teaching. And so that's when I decided that going into environmental education and conservation education was probably the direction I wanted to go. And so those two slides that you jumped forward through just show part of my career in schooling. I ended up going back and getting a master's in environmental education and communication. And this is me in Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. The grad program I was part of was part online, part in person up there in Victoria. And it was very much hands-on in nature, exploring tide pools. The picture before this is me out journaling, sitting in a field with tall grass. And it really reinforced how important it is to, if you're teaching about nature, to find ways to connect with nature as much as possible. And so that's really been
Gabby,
part of my life. Yeah.
you need to go on one of our river rampage trips.
I know I do.
Because this is exactly what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this, along with Grand Canyon Youth and, the stuff that Sarah does with them. And, it's all right up, what you've been doing. But then they do this program. It's called Citizen Science,
Mm-hmm.
where they're actually studying, you probably know about that, the bugs and so forth in the river and how healthy the river is. And
Oh, I didn't know we were doing that too as part of the
yeah.
program.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is totally right up my alley.
Yeah.
You know what? Oh, okay. You know what? I would love to go on mainstream expedition so I can do that.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool.
We don't do citizen science on mainstream, but they do. I know the last trip that I went on, we did meet up with the.
They were doing it on the San Juan. They were collecting a lot of the bugs and looking at it every single night.
Exactly.
Of like what kind of things were in the traps. Yeah,
Oh, that's
was really
so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to do that.
I do want to do that. That's really been what has been most exciting to me in my career, is being able to have those experiences and help create those experiences for people. So that's been, I would love to be able to help with that. And if you want to jump forward a couple more slides. Sorry, Sarah.
You're okay.
This is me. This is when I first started at the zoo 20 years ago, and I'm holding a tortoise, it looks like. So part of my job when I first started was to actually be an animal presenter with our ambassador animals. And so I learned how to hold owls and all kinds of lizards and tortoises and snakes and hedgehogs and all kinds of little guys. And then that's the next, you can go ahead to the next slide. We're just gonna see everything, a preview of everything. And so camping out at the zoo was, we still have this program, and so that's one of the first things I started with, was helping do camp outs. And so we do want to try to figure out how to do a Daring Adventures camp out at the zoo sometime. So we'll keep working on that. So yeah,
what
it's
area do they camp at the zoo?
So there's a couple of different places. We have two buildings that we camp inside, and then there's these kind of permanent tent structures. They're concrete on the bottom, and then they have canvas tops. That's another place that we sleep in. And then we're kind of starting to do away, or no, we're not. I think we might be starting to get away with these individual tents, but I think because you guys have some of the camping equipment, we could talk about bringing your equipment in. to do something. So I think that would be really fun because it is an experience like none other sleeping at the zoo. There's just so many sounds. And so when I first was early on, so Desert Tents, that's that campsite that has the permanent concrete bottoms with the canvas tops. That was built when I was first started working at the zoo. And so I was one of the people that spent we were the first people to spend the night in those tents. And it's right near the lion exhibit. And we had no idea how loud that lion could get in the middle of the night, because what they do is they just, at random times, they'll start roaring and doing this chuffing noise because they're marking their territory and they're making sure all the other lions know that they're here. And so he would just start doing it in the middle of the night. And the first time we all sat up in our sleeping bag. We're like, what was that? Because it's terrifying when you don't realize what's happening in the middle of the night. I mean, he wasn't anywhere near us. He was safe in his enclosure and we were safe in our tent, but man, it was scary. But you hear so much in the mornings. What was that, Tim?
Episode of Tiger King.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it was really cool. So anyway, so then if you fast forward to the next slide, as part of my job at the Phoenix Zoo for a while, we, up until really a couple weeks ago, we were operating the South Mountain Environmental Education Center at South Mountain Park. And the city of Phoenix owns the facility and we were running it. And so that's me. Actually, it's a photo op. It's a fake photo. We were doing this for brochures and stuff, but we led hikes or little guided walks out on the trail there and did field trips and had all kinds of events and programs. And so that's actually how I got involved with Daring Adventures. Is Jerry came to South Mountain to have a meeting with us because, as many of you might know, Daring Adventures has used that Judith Tunnell trail and other trails a lot in programs. And so we were having some initial conversations about how can we get that programming back up and running. And he mentioned in that, well, first of all, he started off with the story about what Daring Adventures does. And I just immediately I'd been looking for something that really I could give my time to and energy to, in addition to my day job, and just fell in love with the organization. And then he said, at the end of the meeting, he said, well, we're looking for board members if you have any interest. And so I just gave him my card and I said, yeah, I'm interested. And then like a month later, I was on the board. So, and I've fallen in love with the organization and the people and everything that Daring Adventures does and stands for. And it's just amazing. And so I'm excited to share a little bit about myself today too. So being connected to nature and helping other people be connected to nature is all about what I'm about. And so I think I'm a good fit with Daring Adventures.
Most definitely. So the telescope program, you started that down there too, right?
We did, yeah.
Is that still staying or did that go now?
We actually donated the big telescope that we have. We just donated to the Girl Scouts at the Parsons Center, which is right around the corner.
Right.
So, unfortunately the building's vacant right now. I think the city is going to be looking for another provider, but I don't know how long it's going to take them to find one.
Right.
So it's just this beautiful space that's really now quiet. But it's been so quiet up there that a family of screech owls started living in one of the trees that's just outside the door. So when we were over there the last month or so just cleaning up, we would just go out and sit on the patio and watch the screech owls for a while.
Wow.
So that was a nice advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was cool. So that's kind of my story. And then Sarah, the rest of the pictures, I found some pictures that jogged my memory of interesting or weird stories that I have of my personal experiences. I tried to focus on animals and the stories with animals because those are the more interesting stories, I think. So I can just kind of tell those stories as we go through, and happy to have people ask questions or jump in with your own stories. So this is a generic sheep. I pulled it off the web because I couldn't find a picture of Maynard the sheep, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. but he was a very lovable, very friendly sheep that lived at Harmony Farm, which is our children's area here at the zoo. And it was probably like maybe 15 years ago, we had a Head Start program. So we went to Head Start schools and taught the kids about caregiving. So they learned about how to care for pets and how to plant plants and seeds, and we brought animals with us. And one of the days as I was tagging along and helping with it, we brought Maynard the sheep. And so I got voted to sit in the back of the van with Maynard and keep an eye on him and make sure he was safe and comfortable. And nobody told me that sheep have the worst flatulence of any animal on the planet, I swear. And so I just basically sat in the back, covering my face the entire time. And my colleague sat up in the front and just giggled the entire ride because they knew what was going to happen, but they didn't tell me what was going to happen. And then we got to the school and he just they had a big courtyard, a grassy courtyard where we were having the class, and all he wanted to do was eat the grass. And so I'm basically being dragged around by this giant sheep that had just been passing gas all over me in the van on the way over there. And I love that story because one, I just loved Maynard. He was such a sweet sheep. And I think if you work with animals, if you have pets, those are the kind of things that just happen. And they're just silly and fun. And I miss him. He was a really great sheep.
How old was he when he passed?
He was old for a sheep. I don't know how old that is. I can't remember, but I would say probably in his late teens, early 20s.
Does the zoo still have that program where that like teaching how to caregive and the animals and stuff like that?
Not exactly in that same way. We have a lot of early childhood programs still that we incorporate caregiving into it. We introduce kids to small animals and have activity stations to connect them with the animals, but it's not that same exact program as that did. It was really fun though. So another thing is we do all kinds of outreach programs and bring animals all over the place. And this was a field trip program that we were doing at the time. It was Chase Field with the Diamondbacks. And so they brought hundreds of kids on a field trip to the stadium, and they sat in the stands and we walked animals. We had a little stage set up on the field, on the dirt part of the field, and had some animals presented on that. And then we walked some animals through the stands, and it took a lot of us to be able to do it because we needed to have big animals and lots of people walking around in the stand. So this picture that we took is the whole time we were there, the staff were just like, don't step on the grass, don't step on the grass, don't step on the grass. They were just you have to be really careful of their grass. And so we had to take this picture and tease them about their rules about staying off the grass. But it was really fun to just we were in the dugout and got to be part of in the stadium and on the ground there. And there's been all kinds of, when you do outreach programs like this, like we've had programs where we've had to dress up in costumes and hold animals so that we could be part of some kind of theme that was happening. And I don't have the great stories, but we have one staff person that takes animals to rural communities in Arizona. And so that position has to spend the night in hotels with the animals. And so there's lots of great stories about being kept up all night by an owl and figuring out how to set the animals up in the room so that they can be active but not keep you up all night. Like putting animals in the bathtub. And so someday we should have our Zoomobile person come and do this because it's pretty awesome.
Gabby, have you ever done anything with Wild at Heart?
I haven't personally, but I'm familiar with the organization.
Yeah, me and my mother used to actually rescue owls for them, bring it to them.
That's so great.
That was so crazy when you actually have to get them out of trees and stuff like that. But
yeah,
that was a lot of fun.
Burrowing owls are one of my favorite owls. I used to go up
I
to
love owls.
Scottsdale Community College. Have you ever been, Sarah, to Scottsdale Community College? If you go, I don't know if they're still there, but in their parking lot, like on the west side, so closer to the freeway, the owls just live in the drain pipes there. And so you can just walk around the parking lot and there's owls just sitting there looking at you.
I think
That's
by
really
one of
interesting.
those, I think by one of those parks or something, I forget which one of those things, they have a burrowing owl thing where you can actually walk by and you see the burrowing owl tubes out of the
Really?
the ground. They have some burrowing owl project around here where you can
That's
actually
cool.
see them. I saw them on a walk with Daring Adventures once. It was
Oh
kind of
my
neat.
gosh. We should totally do a Daring Adventures walk in that area.
Yeah,
That would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Owl
They're
sighting,
such cool birds.
birding.
That would be really fun.
it's a cool photo.
So this is a pronghorn, and I don't know exactly which pronghorn this is, but pronghorn are an antelope species, and they're native here to Arizona. In the you can see them in the wild if you go out into eastern Arizona in the grasslands. So my husband and I like to camp out there in the White Mountains. We try to go every summer, and so every once in a while we see these guys walking around out there. You can sometimes see them too when you're going up to Flagstaff. There's that big Sunset Peak or Sunset Point. It's a trek.
Casio Peak?
What was that?
Casio Peak or?
No, it's up in towards Flagstaff. It's a big rest stop. And
Yeah,
there's
Sunset Point. We always stop there to eat lunch before camping.
yeah. So when you're driving from Phoenix up to there, the grasslands in that area, you can sometimes see the pronghorn. And they're, by nature, they're really, I would kind of say skittish animals because they're prey, right? So they have to always be on the lookout for mountain lions, depending on where they're at, maybe wolves, and the young ones, maybe bobcats. And so they're always trying to keep their eyes open for that. And they respond to noises. They can get really nervous. And so sometimes species like this, antelope in general, have a hard time adapting to zoo exhibits because it's a closed-in space, and if they get frightened by something, they can actually run into a wall or run into a fence. But like if they were out in the wild, it's huge grassland, so they're not used to having those obstacles around them. So we had oh gosh, this is probably maybe 8-9 years ago, a small, I don't know what they're called when they're antelope, a small group of babies, a small herd of babies, pronghorn that were brought to the zoo that I think had been orphaned. I think that's how we got them. So Game and Fish brought them to us to raise here at the zoo, and there was concern about if they weren't comfortable with people that they would potentially get hurt in the enclosure in the exhibit space. And oftentimes at zoos it's the exact opposite. We want them to not be, or not, many times with animals we want it to be different. We don't want them to be comfortable with humans if we're thinking about trying to re-release them, but these guys we knew were going to live here, and so we wanted them to be comfortable. And so what they did is they put out a call, the keeper and the vet staff put out a call to staff within the zoo to help take a shift and go up and bottle feed the babies and just hang out with them. And so we read books to them, and we just sat and talked with each other while the babies were walking around us because they just wanted us to get comfortable. And I have pictures somewhere of me with the baby pronghorn, and I just couldn't find them anywhere. But I have a couple of stories like that where we've just had these great opportunities where usually it's the zookeepers that get to do all that kind of stuff with the animals, but partly since I've been here so long and the zoo world has really changed. I mean, we see pictures of what the zoo was like, the Phoenix Zoo was like back in the 60s when we first opened, and there's people raised baby orangutans back in their houses, and we used to have birthday parties where you could have an orangutan sit at a table with you. And these days we would never do something like that. Everything's what we call protected contact, or most everything, which means that there's always a barrier between the person and the animal, because the orangutans have really, really close bonds with the keepers, and just they really are really love each other. I think the way that they act really demonstrates that, but they're so strong. And so
a side note real quick,
uh-huh.
when we're talking about orangutans, so an orangutan back where I'm from, so that's Erie, PA, at the Erie Zoo, this week actually bit one of the zookeepers, and it was a brand new zookeeper to that orangutan.
Oh, yep. Because it didn't have the bond yet, and it was not
probably
with it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so that's the thing, is even if you, as you're getting to know them, and even if you do know them, an orangutan could want to give you a hug or hold your hand and accidentally rip your arm off. So, and it's not because they're trying to hurt you, it's because they're just so strong. And so we have to be really careful. And zoos used to be a little bit more kind of, do whatever you want. And we're much more careful. And we also try to, like, you wouldn't have an orangutan come to your birthday party because it sets a message that it's okay to have an orangutan as a pet, and it's really not.
right.
And so that's why we've changed. And I don't know if you can see this at all. This is me with a baby ocelot. It's really hard to see, I bet. His name was Padfoot, and he was also born here at the zoo. He broke his leg when he was younger, and so he also needed they were thinking of trying to get him to be an ambassador animal, and so they wanted people to play with him, to get him contact with humans, to see if it would work. And turns out he just was getting way too aggressive, and it wasn't going to work. And even though I got to be one of the people that played with him, in retrospect, I'm glad that we didn't use him as an ambassador animal. So for us, an ambassador animal is an animal that will actually come to a education program or part of our animal shows, and they're trained specifically to be able to interact directly with humans. So we might be able to touch them or get to see them up close. And the ocelot just is not a good, it's a small cat, but it's big enough to do a lot of damage. And it, again, sets that example of, if we use him as an ambassador animal, then people might think that we would encourage them as pets, and we try not to do that. There are some other zoos that really feel differently about that. The San Diego Zoo, they bring cheetahs out, and they Wildlife World Zoo, that's local, they also have different opinions about animals that they'll use in that type of setting. That's how we've chosen to operate. Anybody know what these animals are?
No,
They're called Gerenuk. It's Gerenuk. So Gerenuk.
Oh, wow, and they're able to stand on their hind legs?
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Wow.
So it looks kind of like they're dancing and doing like the little rosy posy, whatever it's called.
Ring around the rosy.
Ring around the rosy, that's what it is, yeah. But they're actually just, the two adults, the bigger ones, looks like they're reaching up to get leaves off of the branch there. And then the baby is just kind of standing with them. But Gerenuk means, in Somali, I think it means giraffe neck. So they're another type of antelope that has that really long neck, and so they can reach higher into the trees. And the next picture, I think, shows a baby face close. And this is, there she is.
Oh.
So, adorable, right? So this is another example. This was, she was actually, she had a leg injury when she first was born. And so another example of an animal that was up in our animal hospital and needed to have attention given to her while she was separated from her herd, and help her feel comfortable to be able to get her medication. And she wasn't eating really well because she was kind of a runt. And so another example of able to go up and hang out with a really cute animal. And I just thought I really just wanted you to see a picture of a baby Gerenuk, because they're like the cutest little things on the
planet. They're cute.
And we have them, a herd of them in the exhibit. Anybody know what this is?
Mm-mm.
You've probably seen them on river trips.
The vulture, isn't it?
Yep. This is a turkey vulture.
Turkey vulture.
Wow.
Yeah. And I threw this one in here because I just thought it was a silly story. When I first, so what the vulture is doing right now, how it's spreading its arms out, it's doing what we call sunning. And they do that to warm themselves up. So they'll get out in the sun and then they'll spread their wings out and they'll let their whole body be exposed directly to the sunlight, which will help warm them up and kind of get them going for the day. So when I first came to the Phoenix Zoo, before I worked here, was on a date with my husband, who wasn't my husband at the time. And we were walking around, and not the turkey vultures, but there's another type of vulture that lives in the Savannah exhibit at the zoo. And they were doing this, they were spreading their wings, and I had never seen that before. And so I was really fascinated because it was like 5 vultures sitting on the ground, all with their arms spread out. It kind of looks like they're in some kind of like religious ritual when they're doing it, because they're all facing the same direction, and just completely fascinated by it. So I was walking and talking to my husband and watching the vultures and musing out loud about what was happening, and I smacked right into a giant boulder and hit my shins on it and was just so embarrassed by it because it messed me up pretty well. I mean, I had a really nice bruise on there. And so we were talking about, well, should we go report it? And then I was like, gosh, but it's not the zoo's fault. It's my fault because I'm a doofus that wasn't paying attention to where I was going. The boulder is still there, by the way, 20 years later, 20 plus years later. But I giggle about it because now that I'm working at the zoo, I see that all the time. People do things like that all the time. And so we have to be so careful about where we put things and where we put signs and everything that we do, because when I mean, people do dumb things all the time anyway, but when you're totally enraptured with the animals that are around you, you just miss like the basic things because you're just so enjoying looking at the animals on the exhibit.
I did that once. I something was going on. It was at our park, and I was walking over there just beyond the playground, going over to our concession stand, and I was looking at our front office, and I don't know what I was looking at, our new signs or something like that, but I just kept walking and kept looking up there, and I ran right into our flagpole. It was like this little 6-inch pole, and I hit it so hard. It's like, gosh, do I feel a concussion coming on? Or it's like, wow.
Wow.
I think I've probably hit that same pole looking at someone or something.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing.
So we're going to change your name to Grace.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't tell that story, Karen.
What happens on Zoom stays on Zoom.
Exactly.
That's good. All right. I can bring out some other stories then too. No, just kidding. I put this picture in here not because I don't have a personal story with these animals, but does anybody know what kind of monkey this is?
The baboon.
It's a mandrill, yeah. And they used to be called mandrill baboons, and now they're just called mandrills. It's kind of one of those weird science where people change names. It took me for years to not call them mandrill baboons anymore. And so we have a male and 2 females here. And they're right next door to the Hamadryas baboons, which are slightly smaller, and they're all brown. And the male has this crazy like mane. And they're super social species, and they're very territorial. And this is kind of like a behind the scenes thing with the zoo. When I saw I was going through the zoo's Facebook page the other day and just like, oh, that picture is a story I could do with. I could do a story with that picture. That's how a lot of these pictures got in here. So anyway, I believe this is Jax, who is our current male, and he is actually really friendly and loves people. And so while the zoo's been closed for COVID, he's one of the animals that the zookeepers, when they were taking their lunch, they would just go sit on a bench near his enclosure. And so he could talk with them, and not like a conversation, but, because he really just wants to be around people. And because of how he was brought up at zoos, And a side story with that, just I don't know, a couple of days ago, we have our drive-through zoo right now, and I was working that, and one of my colleagues pulled me over and he said, because one of the female Hamadryas baboons was sitting by one of the viewing windows, and he was like, just go over and sit next to her. And so I did, and she started chattering at me because she misses humans too. And I had my mask on because we wear masks at work now. And she was looking at me really funny. So I pulled the mask down and took my sunglasses off, and then she relaxed because she could see my whole face and she could see my mouth. Monkeys express a lot with their mouths and their teeth. And so we actually have another monkey. She's a Howler Monkey, and she was raised by humans. And most monkey species, except mandrills, when they smile and show their teeth, they're actually, it's a threat. They're actually upset. And but Olivia, the Howler Monkey, actually doesn't operate that way because she's used to humans smiling at her. And so when she smiles, she's actually happy. But she constantly smiles at other primates who don't realize that she's doing that because she's happy. But mandrills actually, they smile. When they smile, it actually means that they're happy. But anyway, so one is that we just have to hang out with these animals to keep them happy and comfortable during this time when we're not getting to see people. And when we were first starting our drive-through zoo, we had to have somebody stationed right outside the enclosure for Jax, the mandrill, because we weren't really sure how he was going to respond, if the big cars were going to stress him out, or and we have to be really careful if anyone brings service dogs into the zoo. One of the things that we give them instructions on is when they go past the mandrill exhibit, they need to actually keep the dog away from the exhibit. And we actually call out, our park rangers call out on the radio and let the keepers know that there's a service dog so they can keep an eye on the behavior, because they just get really defensive and protective when they see other animals. And we've actually had concerns with people wearing masks during Halloween if they're going, so we have to be careful on Halloween. Actually, the male mandrill is actually put in his bedroom during like the whole week of Halloween, because we know that people are going to be wearing costumes, and that, I mean, you can see that beautiful, colorful face and how expressive that is. And so you can imagine that that's a really important part of their communication. And so seeing another animal with this bright colored or weird looking face, and when you've got, and there's lots of studies with dogs even, that they get freaked out if their human puts a mask on. And so, yeah, we have to be really careful with some of the animals in the things that we do and the things that we let our guests do around them, so that it can cause stress. And these guys they're pretty terrifying if they are upset. And we've never had one get out at the zoo, but we have, both of their exhibits have a large moat in front of it, so that it's wide enough that they can't jump over it. But every once in a while, one of them will be just screwing around on the top of the moat and fall into it, and they don't get hurt. But if they do fall into that moat area, we actually have to, it's what we call a code red, which is when a dangerous animal escapes. Even though he's not out of his enclosure, we evacuate the area just to be safe, and then they put a ladder in there and push the ladder to the other side of the moat, and the baboon will climb up the ladder and go back into the rest of the area.
How deep is that moat? How deep is it?
I want to say, I actually haven't looked at it in a while. It's probably like 10 feet or something. Yeah. I mean, it's deep enough, but it's not so deep that it's causing major problem. I mean, it's not good for the monkeys to fall in there for sure, but I don't think we've had anyone that's gotten injured when they've fallen. But I always just love how we put a ladder in there. Just they'll climb the ladder, go back to their spot.
Aww.
This
is so cute.
Isn't he adorable? This is a Kinkajou. And this particular Kinkajou is named Pippin. But when I first started working at the zoo, we had another Kinkajou. Oh my gosh, Yoda was her name. And you can imagine why we called her Yoda.
Yeah.
And she was one of my favorite animals to work with. And when I was first getting to know her, the way that they had us get to know her is that we would just go in, talk to her through her enclosure, or hang out with her in her exhibit just for a little bit. And I had one night where I was working our overnight program, and I had a break, and so I went back to just kind of hang out with her and spend some time with her. And I was wearing a hat, and she took my hat and climbed into her little nest and decided she was just going to spend the night with my hat. And I was so new that I thought, oh gosh, what have I done wrong? Like, now this animal has stolen my hat and it has something it's not supposed to have. And so I had to call my boss, and they just laughed at me because I was not the first person that had their hat stolen. And those types of things happen with there's just things get stolen. I sometimes will have to help in our petting zoo here at the zoo, because we have staff down there all the time when the petting zoo's open, and we partly help clean up the exhibit, because if you've been around goats at all, you know that they poop all the time. So we partly do that, and then we partly just interact with people and make sure that the people and the goats are safe. And it's inevitable that the day that I wear a skirt to work is the day that somebody calls me because they need help in the petting zoo, and the goats always try to eat my skirt. And so I'm trying to be all modest and professional, and I've got this goat chewing on my skirt hem, trying to pull my skirt off as it's doing it. So we deal with all kinds of stuff like that. I think I only have a couple more pictures in here. Yeah, I think this is this one, and there's one more. So again, this is not my story, but this is a Kori Bustard, which is a really cool bird. It's a flightless bird. They're pretty big and heavy. And this is just one of my favorite zoo stories, is that we used to have Kori Bustards that lived on our Savannah exhibit. So our Savannah exhibit at the zoo here is what we call a mixed species exhibit. So we've got a whole bunch of different animals of different types that are living together. And so the Kori Bustards aren't there anymore, but they used to be out on the Savannah. And the keepers were doing their annual checkups on, I don't remember which species it was, but it was one of the bird species, a different bird species besides the Kori Bustard. And so they have to round up all the birds. And so what they do is that all the keepers that are helping will line up in one horizontal line together with their nets, and they'll all walk towards the birds in unison, which kind of flushes them into one spot so that they're able to collect them safely. And then they'll do their annual checkups on them. So they usually draw blood, they usually check their heart rate and all their other vital signs. They'll weigh them, and they'll just kind of do a visual check to make sure that everything's looking good. And so it's stressful on the animals. I mean, if you've ever had a pet and you bring it to the vet, it's stressful. And it's really stressful here. Our vets always talk about how much sad they are because the animals hate them. They all hate the vet because they recognize the vet and they know that the vet's coming, that person's here. That means I'm probably going to get poked with something, or and so some of the animals we can actually train behaviors so that they're able to, like, for example, our bears, if they need to do a blood draw, or orangutans, that they're trained to just put their hand up on the bar, and then the keeper or the vet can do a really quick pinprick and take the blood that they need, and they get them comfortable with that, so that they don't get nervous and scared when it happens. But with a lot of bird species, you can't do that with them. So anyway, keepers are all lined up and they're doing this, they're getting ready to flush these birds, and look down the end of the line, and the Kori Bustard is in line, perfectly lined up with all of them, just walking alongside of them, helping flush the other birds into the space that they needed. And I wish I had been there to see it, because it just is one of the cutest stories I've ever heard. They're just like, oh, we're just doing this now. Okay, let me help. There's tons of stories like that with our animals here.
How tall is that bird, Gabby?
Probably like 3-4 feet tall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, they're big birds. They're really cool. They're kind of scavengers. They're actually really do well in when there's been a forest fire or a grassland fire. And they'll go in and actually dig around and pull up the grubs and things that have been stirred up with the fire. And so they kind of thrive in that kind of environment, which is really cool.
Wow.
Not a lot of animals.
That's really cool.
Yeah, they're really neat birds. So this is one of the stories where my colleagues here still tease me about this years after the fact. This was 5 or 15-ish, 18 years ago, something like that. So this is not the same turkey, but it's a similar breed of turkey. You can see them all puffed up, showing off. If you go visit our male turkeys here at the zoo anytime, they're usually will puff up like this. And so
why do they do that?
So they are trying to be attractive and large. So either they see you as a threat and they want you to know that they're big and tough and don't mess with them, or they see you as very attractive and they would like you to see how attractive they are. So it just depends on the situation.
You'll never know.
You'll never know unless you were
either good or bad.
Exactly. It's actually better if they think you're a threat than it is if they think you're attractive, because having a turkey jump on you because they want to get your attention is not very fun. I actually have a rooster experience here that I ended up kind of getting my butt kicked by a rooster because I wasn't very tough, and the rooster figured out pretty quickly that I was not going to be aggressive or be dominant over him. So he figured he would be dominant over me. And so he was kicking me, and because I was trying to collect one of his girls to take her to a program. So, and the keepers just shook their head and were like, it's all right, I'll go take care of him. You got to not tell, you have to let him know that you're the boss. Otherwise he's just he had my number.
Yeah.
But anyway, with the turkey, we would bring turkeys, and we still do it, bring them to programs. And I was bringing a turkey to a birthday party. It's in the zoo, so I had to put him into a big dog crate, basically, and then put him on a golf cart and drive him to a spot in the zoo where the birthday party was. And it's kind of poetic because it's very similar to my first story with the zoo. So I was running a little late for the birthday party, and they were all lined up and they were doing their craft and little activity that they're doing, and the adults were all sitting there kind of waiting. And I get out of the cart, and it's a big dog crate, and so you have to kind of like put your arms around on both sides and put it against your belly and walk in like this with it. And I was a little bit anxious because I had been running late for it. And so I'm talking to the people as I'm walking up with the turkey, and I tripped over another boulder as I was doing this and threw the turkey crate like 5-6 feet in front of me, and it just skidded onto the ground and landed in the middle of the birthday party. And the kids just all looked at me like, what is going on? And the parents,
what an entrance.
Yeah, the parents were half mortified and worried about me, and half like trying really hard not to laugh at me because they were worried they would hurt my feelings. And yeah, and the turkey was totally fine. He was just like, whatever, let me out so I can go show off. And I opened the crate, and he started walking around and showing off to all the kids that were in the birthday party. But I
So
like
is
to
there
trip over
any
rocks.
type of a leash on them when they're out like that, or they just
No.
don't run away, huh?
Yeah, they just walk around, and then you just come up behind them and put your hands on their wings and pull them in, and then just tuck them under your arm, basically, and then you can walk them into the crate. I mean, they have to get used to it. So anytime, I mean, that's one of the biggest jobs that a zookeeper does is, aside from just the basic husbandry and cleaning, they also do a lot with animals to get them comfortable with whatever they need to be comfortable with. So whether it's being handled or being around humans, or like the blood draw, for example, that I shared before. We have to train them to go into crates or go into through doors. And so I mentioned the protected contact earlier, like the mandrill, for example, to move the mandrills back and forth between their bedrooms and the outdoor enclosure where they're on exhibit. There is a series of gates that they go through, and they have, it's just this really elaborate gate system and enclosure system so that they can also separate them, because they're animals that they have a very tight knit structure, but then they also can get angry with each other and have fights. And if you get one that gets older or is injured, then some of them might pick on them. And so sometimes you really have to make sure to separate those animals from each other. And so there's all kinds of different enclosures and different gates that you open and close. And so you'll basically, we do what's called shifting. And so you open one door, the animal goes through, and then you close that door, and then you open whatever door, wherever you want to lead them, you open the next door, and then you get them to wherever you need them to go, and then you close the final door. And so then they're in that space, and that's where they're enclosed. But you have to train the animals to do that, because it's not normal. No animal has that kind of thing in their wildlife. So they do a lot of work with animals. And I mean, they do that with elephants. You have to walk an elephant to, the elephants get foot baths. And so they have to train them to actually put their foot up on like a stool, and there's a hole that they put it through, and so that the keeper can be on the other side and actually do the cleaning their toes and checking their feet and everything. And then they teach them how to put their foot in a soak, basically like a salt soak, an Epsom salt soak. And so there's all kinds of things that the keepers have to work with the animals to be able to do that, so that they can care for them and it not be a stressful situation.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked a lot about like animals, but what about some more about the conservation? Like, what does it do for the animals, and like why is it, and what different aspects does the Phoenix Zoo do?
Yeah, thank you. I just shared all my silly stories. So conservation is a huge part of why this Phoenix Zoo exists and why most zoos exist. And so the work that we do varies depending on the animal. So in some cases, what we are doing is that we have an animal here at the zoo, and we're keeping it, maybe it's an older animal, and so we're keeping it here so that there's room at a different zoo for younger animals of that species to be able to breed. So that's one way that we help with the animals. In some cases, we'll actually be breeding an animal. So for example, there's a program called the Species Survival Plan, which what that means is that there are professionals in the zoos and aquariums that all work together, and they manage a species. And so they look at all the tigers that are in managed care facilities in the US and some in other countries. We actually know their history. We know where they were born. We know who they've bred with, and we know if they are old enough to breed. We know who their parents were and who their grandparents were. So we call it a stud book, where all that information is kept. And so the Species Survival Plan is a committee of people that actually looks at all that information and makes recommendations for different tigers that should be matched up. So we have 3 tigers here at the zoo, 3 Sumatran tigers, 1 male and 2 female. And the male his genes are well wanted. We want him to have babies if we can, because he's not related to a lot of other tigers that are in managed care. And so he's pretty unique. And so we have 2 other females that were sent to live with us that we're hoping that he'll breed with. And because they're also their genes are fairly unique in the managed care world as well. And so we're hoping that sometime in the future we'll have tiger cubs here. So that's another way that we help with conservation. And then we have some more direct ways that we do. We have a native species conservation center here, and we work with black-footed ferrets and Chiricahua leopard frogs, some garter snakes. We have squirrels, Mount Graham red squirrels, which are only found on Mount Graham in the southern Arizona area, and a couple other species. And what we're doing there is breeding them, and like for example, the Chiricahua leopard frogs, we do what's called a head starting. And so what we do is we have often we collect egg masses from the wild, bring the egg masses into the zoo and raise the tadpoles and raise them up until they're a little bit older, and then release them back in the wild. And what that does is it raises their potential of being able to survive in the wild. And so it helps the population have a better chance, because typically when you have an egg mass of frogs, they have hundreds of eggs that they lay at a time, and maybe only a handful of those will actually survive to adulthood. So when we head start them, we actually give them a better chance of surviving to adulthood. Our black-footed ferrets, we actually breed them here, and then they are taken to another facility when they get a little bit older, so that they can be released back into the wild there. So we're helping the wild population. And so the black-footed ferrets are in a space that's biosecure. So people that go in there have to shower and gown up and wear masks and booties and things before they go in, because ferrets are susceptible to human diseases, including the COVID-19.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we've had to put in some extra precautions with them, working with them since the virus hit. And so we are very, very careful with them. And we feed them, most of our animals here at the zoo, we feed not live prey. We feed them, if they're carnivores, they'll get meat, like frozen meat that you would get at a grocery store. Or they might get mice, but they're frozen mice, and we thaw them out. And so we know that they've been raised and cared for in a really secure, safe space. And so we know that we're getting animals that don't have diseases. And then also, it's just it's kind of cruel to have a mouse that you release into an enclosure that's closed space. It can't defend itself very well, and it could also injure the animal that you're trying to feed. And so for the most part, that's how we feed the animals. But for the black-hooded ferrets, because we are going to release them back in the wild, they have to actually eat live prey. And so they're actually fed, I don't know what they're fed, actually, now that I think about it. Sometimes they're fed prairie dogs when they get to a certain age, actually, because prairie dogs are what they would eat in the wild. So it's a really different way that they're managed and cared for because of how we're going to bring them back. And then in some ways we're helping is we're actually doing research with the Mount Graham red squirrels. There's not a lot of information known about their breeding habits. And so we're actually studying them here and trying to figure out, how do you actually breed a red squirrel in captivity, and what does that take? And they're only able to breed something like 5 days a year. And so trying to figure out what those 5 days are is really hard. And so we have a group of scientists that are studying that. So it's kind of a range. And then we have people that work internationally too. I actually help with a project that we work on in Costa Rica. And so I typically go there once a year to help with that project. I help with the education side of it. Happy to do a presentation on that sometime if you ever want to hear the details on it. I don't know if I'll get to go this year though. I don't think we're going to have the budget for it. Things are really different with COVID.
Well, thank you so much, Gabby, for coming on and talking to us about the Phoenix Zoo. Do we have any other questions for Gabby before she heads on out?
Yeah. How many species of owls are at the Phoenix Zoo, actually?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. We have great horned owls, burrowing owls, spectacled owls. I think those are the only ones we have on exhibit. And then we also have...
They're beautiful birds.
Yeah, they're really cool. Burrowing owls are still my favorite. They're always my favorite.
I love the great horned owls.
Yeah, we have, I think, 2 of them here.
A while back, Wild at Heart got a really rare find. They got like one of those snow owls in as a rescue.
A snow owl?
Yeah, like
Wow.
years ago, they got one of those snow owls in, and they sent it to another rescue group. But that was a really cool thing. I didn't get to see it. They told me about it.
Oh my gosh, they're huge.
Wow.
Too. I've seen them at different zoos. Oh, we also have a barn owl too.
Yeah,
They're
I have one of those in my telephone pole out front.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Any other questions?
Yeah. I'm afraid I have to leave. I'm afraid I have to leave because I got a phone appointment at 1 o'clock.
That's absolutely a-okay. So just for everyone that's still here, this is the end of our social hour, and we will be having another social hour next Wednesday. I'm gonna have Matt Boner on, and he's going to talk about photography, how to get some great nature shots, animal shots, adventure shots, what kind of cameras to use, what type of settings to use, and how you can use different depth perceptions and different like equipment such as like glass crystal balls to do different effects for photography in the nature.
Oh, I'll be on that one.
Awesome. So I hope to see you guys next Wednesday. It should be probably, I'm guessing, the afternoon. I'm going to have that time, and I'm going to be sending everything out probably by the end of today.
Okay.
Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining. And Jerry wanted me to let everyone know that he said goodbye. He had to go.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty, I'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Okay,
Right,
see you there.
everybody.
Bye, Gabby.
Thank you,
Bye.
Gabby.
Bye.
Thanks, Gabby.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
I hope it was enjoyable.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.
I know I'm sad I was late.
Yeah, we have these recorded, Karen, and we're going to be uploading them to our resource page on our website.
Oh, okay, good.
Alrighty, awesome. I will see you guys all.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.